Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to talk to you about a really important subject when you're doing any type of upper body exercise, and that's the proper positioning of your wrist. And when I say proper wrist positioning, I'm really talking about a number of different ways that the wrist can be moving or be positioned during actual exercise. Now, of course, this is going to depend heavily on the exercise that you are performing. And there are certain elements to wrist positioning that are for sure going to be preferential, meaning it's not a big deal one way or the other biomechanically, whether you do it this way or that way. And then it's just based on personal preference. I'll give you a great example. If you've ever done a bench press, for instance, with a bar or even dumbbells, but generally it's with a barbell. You'll notice that there's two sort of main ways that people will hold the barbell. One is with the wrist straight and the thumb over the bar. So literally gripping the bar with the thumb over, right, on the opposite side of the fingers, right? And so you can imagine holding a bar like this and doing the bench press this way. So in that case, generally, not all the time, but generally, the wrist would be in a straight position, holding the bar this way. And of course, the opposite, I wouldn't say opposite, but the other way is to have the thumb on the same side. So we would call this an opposing grip, and this would be a grip on the same side of as the fingers. And you can literally hold the bar like this. So you can see the difference. Holding the bar this way, right, versus grabbing the bar this way. This is going to have a fairly profound effect on the position of the wrist. Now, the point is with those two variations, that is preferential. The only issue that you're going to see, and why we generally recommend to take a thumbed grip versus the thumbless, is because of the potential for the bar, depending on the weight, the potential for the bar when you're doing a thumbless grip for the bar to obviously fall out of the hands and then fall on you. So we take a thumbed grip. So the thumb grip is with the thumb around it. Generally, we'll do that just because from a safety perspective, it makes more sense. But I will put that on the sort of the side, over here saying that that is preferential. For instance, I can train bench press, either way. I can do it with a thumb or thumbless grip. But I will say this, that the thumbless grip like this, for me, and I know for most weightlifters that use fairly heavy resistance, prefer the thumbless because of the position of the wrist. And you can see how, if you take a look at where my thumb, when I'm grabbing something, a thumbless grip can actually feel more comfortable, right? The gripping component can actually feel more comfortable. I'm not saying it's safer. I'm just saying that preferentially, provided I've got my wrist back slightly enough so that the weight distribution is going directly through the forearm itself, right? So as long as the resistance or the line of force is going straight through the forearm, then in general, it's not going to be an issue with you losing control of it. But once again, this is something that you have to decide when you're training somebody. Again, what I would always recommend is that you take a thumbed grip, particularly with individuals that do not have a lot of experience. So again, I can do it one way or the other. I don't particularly use a whole lot of resistance, so I'll take a thumbed grip when I do it. Once again, the only difference is, like as I was showing you, that with a thumbless grip, the position of my thumb can actually affect the way it feels on my wrist. So if I do a thumbed grip, for instance, I'm actually able to keep my wrist in a straighter position this way, versus when I do a thumbless grip back here like this. Well, what do I have to do now? Now the weight has to sit back slightly this way. I hope you can see the difference. With a thumbed grip, the thumb actually ensures that the bar does not fall forward, right? With a thumbless grip, I've got nothing blocking it, and therefore I've got to distribute the weight backwards so that the line of force goes straight through the forearm, and then I can do the movement that way. By the way, this works the same with bench presses and the same thing with overhead shoulder press. So in that case, is there an issue with the wrist position? Only so much as a quote element of or potential for danger or injury. But as far as actually holding the wrist back mechanically, there's not necessarily that big of an issue. Now, look, if a client is feeling discomfort when they're holding the weight back like this, even with a thumb grip, that's when you have to redirect the position of the wrist. And I will say this, from a purely biomechanical perspective, the position of the wrist forward or backward is generally going to be safest, right, when you are in a neutrally flexed or extended position. Now, remember, the wrist goes through a couple of degrees of freedom. The first one is flexion and extension, right? So wrist flexion is up this way. Wrist extension is moving the hand back. So that's 1 degree of freedom this way. But the wrist can also, you know this, the wrist can also move side to side. And so there is a 2nd degree of freedom that the wrist can move through from side to side. So front and back and side to side. Now, the whole side to side movement, you're probably not going to have any involvement with that while you're doing standard resistance training exercises. One of the other, or I should say the final movement is technically not a wrist movement, although it is a wrist and I guess you can say wrist and elbow simply because the radius and the ulnar are twisting. And that's going to be pronation versus supination. And when we talk about proper wrist positioning, this is really the element. And again, don't get me wrong. If you're doing flexion and extension at the wrist, if your client is feeling pain during a bench press or a push-up or some other exercise, then for sure you're going to have to make modifications to the positioning of the extension. Generally, what I have found is that when the wrist is in an extended position, that's where folks will start to feel it. Like if you're doing a push-up, right, your wrist is in full extension. How are you going to take care of that? My general resolution for any type of issues related to push-ups, whether they're close or far apart, is I will have my clients hold dumbbells. Okay, now think about this. If I hold a dumbbell and put it on the ground, then I'm able to maintain a neutrally flexed or extended wrist position, right? If I'm holding a dumbbell this way, it's on the ground, I can now do a neutrally flexed or extended position. And the other thing that I'm able to do is move it from a fully pronated position. Now think about this. Okay, this is why you got to get these terms straight. If I have my hands flat on the ground like this, number one, I am fully pronated, right? Because pronation is this internal rotation of the wrist so that the thumbs kind of face in towards each other. So that's pronation. And when I'm doing the actual movement, my wrist is also in a fully extended position. So this is wrist extension, and this is wrist flexion. So wrist extension. So when I combine this pronation with extension, that's generally where, if your clients are feeling discomfort, that's why it's happening. Now, how do you resolve that? Well, try to do 2 things. Neutrally pronate. Get what I'm saying? So go from fully pronated position to a neutrally pronated position, and go from a fully extended position to a neutrally extended or flexed position, depending on. And the way you do that is by holding a dumbbell on the ground. And now you can see if my hand is this way, I'm not extended and I'm not pronated. So I move into neutrally pronated, and in the case of like a push-up, I move it back into a neutral position of flexion extension. That generally takes care of it. I don't think I've ever dealt with anybody, whatever their age category or fitness level, where doing push-ups that are uncomfortable, moving them, holding on to dumbbells. And by the way, it doesn't have to be anything more than a 5-pound dumbbell. Anything that gets their hands away from the floor and allows them to hold it in a closed fist position. So you get the idea. Bench presses, shoulder presses, generally the issue that I have found is that, yes, there could be issues with an overextension at the wrist, but remember, generally it's going to be thumbless grip versus thumbed grip that's going to change the feeling and the mechanics of how the wrist is positioned somewhat. Push-ups are generally going to be the one exercise that I have found that causes more issues because of this fully extended position of the wrist while they're doing the movement. And this way, we can alleviate that by having them move into this neutral position. Another exercise that obviously involves the wrist is going to be something like dumbbell curls. When you think about dumbbell curls or even lateral raises, wrist position can have a profound effect on whether or not you feel it in the target muscle. Now, keep in mind, well, let's do the bicep first. So if you're doing a barbell curl or a dumbbell curl, anytime you're training your biceps, it's not a bad idea to do multiple wrist positions, meaning supinated position, neutrally supinated or pronated. And I don't generally do pronated or reverse curls with clients. It's just uncomfortable and it's not necessary. It's not like you need to build their brachioradialis muscle, but you can do it. But the two main ways that I would always recommend is doing in a supinated position and a neutrally pronated position, right? Hammer curls. But if you're doing them in a supinated position, wrist flexion and extension position can have a profound effect. If you flex the wrist, so if the wrist is flexed while you're doing curls, you are generally going to start feeling it in the forearm flexors, right? So we want to be in either a neutrally extended flex position, or better yet, try messing around a little bit with the amount of extension during your dumbbell curl. So when I'm doing a dumbbell curl, I'll literally have my clients try doing it in neutrally flexed extended position. And then just for fun, I'll say, go ahead and flex this way. And they'll go, oh, no, I feel it in my forearm. Well, we're not trying to train their forearm. We're trying to train their bicep. Then I'll have them drop their wrist back slightly. And then we start to pinpoint that level at which they really start to feel it in their bicep. Now, there are obviously mechanical and anatomical reasons why this occurs. You're just worried about getting your clients to feel it in the target muscle. So, by the way, it works the same thing with barbell or dumbbells. The last exercise that I was just mentioning was like lateral raises. I have found very interesting thing about doing lateral raises and their wrist position. The proper positioning of the wrist is always going to be determined by how your client, or whether your client feels it in their deltoids or not. And what I have found is that, interestingly enough, unlike the push-up, like where you have this extended position and that could be a problem, believe it or not, when I do lateral raises, I will generally have my clients go into an extend. You see how I'm lifting and extending my wrist? Now, don't overdo it. But what I have found is when I move the wrist from a neutrally flexed, extended position, all I got to do is kind of lift up, extend the wrist slightly. So I go from here to about here. Now, when I do that, guess what happens? It lifts my elbows up slightly. Try it. Okay, grab a couple of dumbbells, move into an extended position. And what you're going to find is those elbows would drop down, and then just lift them up, extend the wrist. Guarantee you're going to feel it a whole lot more, and your clients will feel it a whole lot more in their deltoid. So keep in mind, wrist position, flexion and extension is going to be generally different when you're doing like a push-up. Now that extended wrist position can be uncomfortable, even painful, versus, like I just said, in the lateral raise, it's actually the opposite. That lifting of the wrist, actually turning the thumb down slightly, will get that elbow up. They'll actually feel it more in their shoulder. Look, if you found this video to be helpful, please type the word understood in the comment section below. Also, take a look in the description box, because if you're interested in becoming a certified personal trainer, qualified personal trainer, then go ahead and click on that link. We are always doing a Wednesday night Quizlet live study, by the way. You always got to mention this, that Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do Quizlet live study. It's a great way to help memorize the materials. If you're a BDU student, then absolutely come on board with us to play Quizlet live, to learn the materials and or concepts, right? Terms, concepts in a fun way. 30 minutes, by the way, 6 to 6:30. That's Eastern Standard Time. Remember, Eastern. So if you are on Central Mountain or Pacific, you must adjust your time accordingly. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and let us know how we can be of assistance. Have a great week. We'll see you later. Bye.